also it goes on automatically. I don't know how to stop it.
Okay, so let's use this.
It's impossible. How do we stop it?
Du hast den Automatik drin.
Wo ist das?
Guck mal,
Instruments. No.
Budget. There was somewhere here.
Okay.
Now,
Now the transition. This.
Revision.
Presentation. Animation.
Presentation. No, this is presentation. Yeah, Präsentation.
Intervals.
No.
No.
Don't use intervals.
Was, da macht
Then
genau.
I unclick. So maybe it's this.
Ja.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to connect the.
I'm talking about Fagotte players and builders and some lost repertoire.
Okay, that means it's an addition to what Aurel presented.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why it's after.
Okay.
When it's ready.
If it has USB-C for sure, yes. Which it does. Not exactly how I wanted it.
But you did.
There we go. We do a check.
Okay.
Perfect. So it's on. Anywhere. Just any pocket is fine.
Okay, welcome back. The baby is here, we can continue. No, in fact, Thomas was the last one. I'm happy to present now the next paper, the next session. It's starting with Giovanni Battista Grazia Dio, who is also a member of the project team. And he is well known as a performer in many places, and he's teaching on many places, perhaps on too many places, say in Brescia and in Bremen, and he's living somewhere between and traveling and researching and so on. And he studied, among other things, here at the Schola, and he is working in the project from the beginning onwards, and he is doing a PhD on a special topic, a little bit related to the topic of the research project. And I think I don't have to introduce you much more because you're well known among the peers here around. And the topic of this talk will be a little bit a second part of what we've heard from Aurea in the morning, now a little bit more focused on the same big problems, instruments, musicians' use of these fagottini and tenorons. Please, Giovanni.
Thank you so much, Martin. And thank you for surviving lunch and being here now. So yes, I have Giovanni and Battista. I send both to work for myself, one researching and the other one working. I would like to start saying that we gather testimonies of concerts, musical works, which would include not only potpourri with the adaptations of arias from operas, but also music specifically composed for these small-sized bassoons, for these small-sized instruments. And this will offer me now the opportunity to talk about very talented bassoonists, builders, and information which may influence contemporary practice. The composition of potpourri is a musical practice and a genre that becomes very common in the second quarter of the 19th century. The composer, often involved as a soloist, chooses to rework arias and music from famous operas, as said, and is using a reduced ensemble or even a wind-only instrumental group, transforming the original musical material in a selected collection of themes and variations. It can be seen, in fact, as almost as a secondary consequence to harmonic music in a way, and as a sort of divertimento. In a potpourri, however, one or few specific solo instruments have a dominant role and a space in the composition. As said, the direct protagonists of these pieces are often the composer themselves, and famous examples concerning the bassoon are those by Almenreder, Gebauer, and Jacobi. Often, the motivation to write and to play such pieces is clearly connected to the wish or the necessity to be noticed by the soloist. Apparently, in the case of bassoonists, there was also the option of playing small-sized bassoon. So far, we haven't found any evidence of performers who had their whole career on a small-sized bassoon, as I think we don't expect any flute player to perform concert only with a piccolo. So the bassoon players I will mention today can be seen as talented bassoonists who gave concerts not only with the full-size instrument, but also with a fagottino or a tenoron. One of the protagonists of this phenomenon is, for sure, Valentin Zeika. Zeika was a Bohemian musician born in Prague who arrived to Vienna in 1802 because he was chosen to be the first bassoon player of the theater under Wien, and he will keep this position for over 19 years. For this reason, Zeika is an important figure among the history of the bassoon, as he had been working in direct contact with Beethoven. It is with Symphony, for example, number 4, that Beethoven had begun to write for Zeika as independently as for the other woodwinds. So the famous finale with the exposed staccato section, which all bassoonists know very well and had to learn quite well, has been composed exactly for him. In any case, Beethoven wrote repeatedly for his solo bassoonists in other compositions like Fidelio, Leonore, the Violin Concerto, and Symphony 5, 7, and 8. So indeed, a remarkable instrumentalist. And we know from historical sources that he has performed as a soloist not only on the full-size bassoon, but also on the tenoron, for which he had composed some variationen. A composition that can be then related to this discussion. The Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung reports that Zeika performed his own variations on for tenor fagot on 2 occasions. in 1815 for a benefit concert, and in 1821 in a concert in honor of the famous soprano Angelica Catalani. In the chronicle, the instrument is described as being smaller than the regular bassoon and having a sonorous and pleasant tone. Always from historical references, such as Biographie universelle des musiciens by François-Joseph Fétis, we know that Zeika wrote 7 bassoon concertos and several military marches, which are still available in manuscripts, so not printed. Sadly, most of this music has not been yet located. The life of Zeika had a radical change with the arrival of the young bassoonist August Mittag in Vienna. In fact, he was not anymore politically supported, and he had to find a new employment, becoming a wind band player, actually a Kapellmeister in a Royal Austrian Line regiment at the age of 52. And he was forced to leave Vienna and was sent very far away, down to Naples. Once in Naples, Zeika might have met many local bassoonists and builders and might have influenced the practice of the fagottino playing also there in this city. Raffaele de Rosa was not only a very good woodwind instrument maker, a bassoonist, and a teacher, but he declares himself also as a fagottino player. This Neapolitan figure advertised himself quite often in newspapers, the so-called Giornale delle Due Sicilie, the newspapers of the Two Sicilies, and from many different sources, we know that he studied in the Collegio San Sebastiano, an institution which previously absorbed the famous 4 conservatories, La Pietà dei Turchini, Sant'Onofrio a Capuana, Santa Maria di Loreto, and so on. And he studied mainly with Giacomo Moritz, who was first bassoonist of a military band called Del Primo Reggimento, dei Granatieri della Guardia. Moritz, so the teacher of our De Rosa, might have indeed met Zeika because of sharing the same band, with band environment. In 1852, he is mentioned in a contract to supply instruments for the Bourbon army, and always De Rosa, together with other makers, is involved to big deliveries of instruments, always for wind bands like the Royal Infantry Corps. What is really important also for our catalog is that even if there is no trace of De Rosa performances on the fagottino, we detected one instrument made by him. So he openly also was a player and declared himself as a player. And here we have a surviving specimen, which is now preserved in the Victorian Albert Museum collection. Comparing the aesthetic and the general measurements of this instrument with those of the anonymous Gitano rune, which we have in our catalog, the FT6, which is this one, I believe, comparing this style and measurements, I believe that this anonymous might not be so anonymous and might be attributed to De Rosa as well. There are parallel references which even confirm the existence of a Neapolitan style of building instruments, like the one offered by the double reed maker Giuseppe Banci from Florence, who in November 1843 advertised himself in the Gazzetta Musicale as fabbricatore di pivette. Pivette is a double reed. And for any sort of instruments, and the wished model, which was at that time common. And he is just specifying models like those from Vienna, Naples, and Paris. And then we can see also the Quartino di Fagotto. So he was also building reeds for Quartino di Fagotto. So the listing of these three main kind of models is in fact is putting in highlights the presence of an old Neapolitan style of instrument building. And of course, the Quartino di Fagotto is a further evidence of the spread of this musical instrument within Italian regions. A consistent Neapolitan tradition of wind instrument builders can be traced between the 18th and 19th century, and Cristoforo Custode, much before De Rosa, built an octave bassoon, which is nowadays preserved in Rome inside the Museum of Santa Croce in Jerusalem. This is, so far, the earliest example of Neapolitan bassoon surviving in museums, and we hope others will pop out soon. The same can be said about Neapolitan repertoire. Aurea mentioned already Porpora, but we also found examples by Perez, Anfossi, and Cimarosa, who seemed to be quite familiar with this little instrument and employed fagottini or tenorune also in their operas. The Neapolitan Giuseppe del Cupola was another student of Giacomo Moritz. So Moritz was the teacher of De Rosa and del Cupola. And he was studying around 1820, 1825, so more or less at the same time of his friend De Rosa. In the sources written with funny names, del Cupolo, Cupolo, Cupola, but it's always him because he's always advertising himself as a bassoonist and teacher. He played in the orchestra of the Real Teatro del Fondo in Naples, and in this same place, Teatro del Fondo, in 1838 he performed Variazioni per Fagotto con accompagnamento d'orchestra, as well as like Dulcis in Fundo, a cavatina from the opera La Parisina by Donizetti, with a G tenorune, here written as Quintino Fagotto, and he performed the variation and the cavatina between the first and the second act of L'Elisir d'Amore by Donizetti. A very funny moment. There's an opera and then there is an interpolation of other concerts. And this concert was very well planned by Del Cupola because he had to gather money. He was really in need of money in that moment of his life. And so he had to choose very, very well his weapons to impress his audience. Funny enough, or interesting enough, he chose the Quintino Fagotto, so the G tenorune, to do that. Perhaps he was also using an instrument made by his friend De Rosa, and perhaps the one preserved in London nowadays is the one that Del Cupola used, or even could be this one, which we have here on the table that we'll all hear tonight, played by my colleague Letizia Viola. De Rosa was not only, of course, the friend of Del Cupola, because we know even that his son, Vincenzo Antonio Maria del Cupola, studied bassoon with De Rosa. And this is important because the relation between the two musicians becomes even more interesting, knowing that Vincenzo started bassoon very, very early in age. And this is something that fits very well the data collected so far in Naples. We know in Naples bassoon was taught already in the second half of the 17th century, and we know that they were entering at a very young age, between 7 and 10, and they were taken as bassoonists, so for the studies of bassoon. We cannot be 100% sure if that was exactly their starting point, but it is possible that such a small instrument were employed for the pedagogy of the music and the bassoon, in particular to these young kids. Possibly Vincenzo started his studies on a little instrument like the one we see here, or I just showed before. The Neapolitan treatise on wind-band instrumentation by Domenico Gatti in 1879 still explains qualities of the fagottino, why and how should be used, including how should be notated. But 33 years before, in 1846, the Gazzetta Musicale di Milano was informing how wind bands were composed in Austria through the words of Farbach, who says that 2 fagottini are often used instead of the caccia. By the way, Farbach composed and printed something like 24 purpuris using many Italian opera themes by Verdi and Donizetti for trio, flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon. Leaving Naples and going farther north in Italy, specifically in Emilia-Romagna, we find in Ferrara a famous local musician, Giovanni Urbani. The libretto, which I'm gonna show you now, of Il trionfo della fede or Gli arabi nelle Indie by Giovanni Pacini, performed in Ferrara in 1830, mention Urbani as fagottino tenorino player. This is, of course, is not specifically related to the practice of purpuri, but in a way it is related to the opera context and how the same bassoonist or bassonists would confront themselves using the same instrument for a kind of part of bassoon, first bassoon may be used as English horn part, and then using that same voice to replace the singer part, because this is what possibly could have happened, to make the main melody of the theme of the aria. Giovanni Urbani, in any case, is mentioned in many operas as first bassoon player between Ferrara and in operas like Rossini, and most of the time somehow it's missing his role. So we know he was a first bassoonist, or we know he was a bassoonist, but sometimes it's not specified what was actually playing. Maybe because he was actually used a small size instrument which was not clear how to mention. This is difficult to say, but this kind of practice, it is in fact not so uncommon. And in the Olimpiade of Francesco Bianchi of the 1781, we already see the option of fagotto or corno inglese. So I wouldn't be surprised that some 50 years later they were still doing something like this, according to what the orchestra could offer at that moment. If you have a fagottino, well, then we don't have an English horn. Please take the part. This kind of context, anyway, might have also influenced the bassoonists to go to make a further use of this instrument to showcase themselves. Another compatriot and contemporary of Urbani is Giovanni Andreis, which is instead much more active in Modena, close to Ferrara and Bologna, because Urbani was more going to perform between Bologna and Ferrara, while we just know some testimonies, some evidence from Andreis in Bologna. He was also first oboe player, and was also involved in wind band contexts like Battaglione Estense. And what is also interesting is that at one point of his career, he decided to perform a concert. Here we go. This is dated 1826, January 1826, in Modena. A concert on a quartino fagotto, which I assume is a tenor in F. And he's performing this Gran Rondò taken from the Andromaca. Here is said the Grande Maestro Mercadante, del Maestro Mercadante, but in fact Mercadante never wrote such a piece, such an opera, and it's more likely to be a mistake, and perhaps the real composer is Paisiello. A chronicle, also dated some years later, in 1835, is positively describing a Christmas concert that Giovanni Andreis, gave in Bologna, playing a potpourri with an obbligato bassoon, but it's not really specified what kind of instrument was using. What is also important is that in this triangle, Modena, Bologna, Ferrara, we find also an important maker, Giacinto Riva, who was active in the same years, more or less, of Andreis and Urbani. And he was, in fact, active firstly in San Giovanni in Persiceto, which is very near Bologna, and then exactly in Ferrara, where Urbani was doing his whole career. Another protagonist is Giacomo Pagnoncelli. Pagnoncelli was another celebrated Neapolitan virtuoso of the bassoon and also of the fagottino. In fact, he had a quite active career in Italy and France and in Spain, and newspapers are the main sources of information about this musician. He gave concerts together with famous singers, and he was performing his own potpourri arrangements of opera arias, like those from the opera I Lombardi alla prima crociata by Verdi, as well as his own composition, of course. There are interesting historical references celebrating his talent on the tenorune and on the full-size bassoon all over Italy, from Milano, in Florence, near Barcelona, and the south part of France. Also in this case, Pagnoncelli, for the case of Pagnoncelli, as it was Napolitan, might have used an instrument made by Raffaele de Rosa, even though there is no evidence of what exactly he was using. As already this morning James Kopp really illustrated about the situation in France, we find important names like Jean Cour and Jean Espagnet, who also wrote important music for bassoon and methods, both of them. We know that they were using small-sized bassoons. In particular, Espagnet who was also serving basically everywhere in most of the orchestra in France, as mentioned by Kopp this morning, he was playing tenorune also to replace English horn. So this practice is not so uncommon also in France, probably. In the case of Jean Cour, we actually know that he possessed and gave to the conservatory a fagottino by the loose, maybe because he was teaching to a young student with this instrument, but we also know that he performed on Savary bassoon in E flat, so he might have used also a smaller instrument to give concert. James already mentioned the concert in the showrooms of the piano maker Mercier and Souffletot. But the reality is that, for example, like we were saying this morning, the amount of instrument is corresponding on the amount of music or how much they were used. But if we look what is just in the Paris Museum, we find 11 small-sized bassoons from different makers, so Savary, Père, Jeune, Jacobi, Prof, Porto, Adler. This must have been an evidence, we could say now, this must be an evidence of a quite extended use of bassoon, at least in the professors of music, like those mentioned by Kopp, so in the Parisian circle. These few examples from Austria, Italy, and France just were an occasion to give some information about historical performances practiced with these small-sized instruments. And the fact that bassoon player decides to use a fagottino or a tenorone to showcase his own abilities and his own virtuosism should tell us something on how nowadays we should use this instrument. Actually, we should start to use this instrument. So also the consistent tradition, which is clear, at least in the Neapolitan area, reveals this use of bassoons and tenoroons, which certainly has a strong Central European counterpart, like in France and in Austria, and perhaps also in Germany, that yet must be explored in depth. So I thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you have questions to ask.
The floor is open.
You did not mention your last name.
Espagnet was, no, I did, but I didn't click on it, I'm sorry. Espagnet was replacing even Jean Court, so he must have been a quite talented and skilled player. And as James Kopp explained this morning, he was playing English fagottino to replace English horn in operas. So we know about Jean Court that he was playing, we could say, a small-size instrument, because an instrument in E flat is smaller than a full-size instrument for concerts in the piano maker in Paris. What actually I would like to add about the instrument in A flat is that also the Rosa is building such an instrument. No, this is Banshee, sorry, here. This terzini fagotti. And so we really should try to figure out how, when, and what these instruments were used and for which music. But also I want to mention that in our catalog we have some, what we believe, but we cannot be 100% sure, because they're reduced, but not so much reduced. For example, from the Swiss maker Ischbrunner, we have, I think, 2 specimens of instrument in E flat, but maybe they're not in E flat and the pitch was extremely high. It's very difficult, how to distinguish them, and so it really needs a different way of studying, I think. What we have achieved so far is just that the measurement in comparison with the full-size bassoon can be related in a half to the octave bassoon and between a third when it's in G and a third and a bit when it's in F. So it's not really clear how to scale, how to define the E-flat instrument.
Other questions? During the audience can murmuring and thinking about the questions, I have one.
Yes.
You mentioned quite shortly the Neapolitan aspects, that the fagottino might be used as the first instrument for these young bassoon students coming to the conservatories in an age of 7, 8, 9. Certainly, what may not seem appropriate to have a full-size bassoon at the beginning. Is there any more harder evidence than just you made it quite cleverly? You said this is possible. Do we have any inventories from the conservatories where we can see in the list? Okay, there were smaller bassoons or something.
The thing is, also as we saw before with the cause of the nomenclature. Sometimes they were just called fagotti. And so when I see the directories that were buying instrument, it's always just fagotto, fagotti mentioned. Sometimes it's fagotto with 3 pieces, with 3 added pieces, but it's never about the size. Almost never. I couldn't.
Perhaps
stop.
I can share a very naive observation, showing or seeing all the pictures of bassoons, small bassoons, and so on. If you have not a scale like the bottle of champagne showed by Aurea in the morning, for me, and I'm a little bit specialized in this, they're looking all quite the same size. For this, I can completely understand if somebody doing an inventory has no clue, oh, this is a small bassoon, because you have nearly a bigger one, with the exception of the ottavino or the fagottino, really to discover it. However, if this is not the case, we can, first we thank you again.
My pleasure.
And we can prepare the next presentation. And we will focus, we will concentrate the focus a little bit closer to the next in the next paper. And I start already to introduce Zoe. Okay, yeah. She's at the moment not here, but she was here. It was the mother of the baby. and for this, it was decided to present her presentation via a video. But if she will enter afterwards, we can ask the question directly to her. However, to introduce Zoe is as well one of the members of the very efficient research team of this research project on fagottini. And of course, she is a player on bassoon. She studied in England as well here at the Schola and worked from the beginning in this research project. And her topic is now a little bit more focused. We have heard from Aurea a big overview about the use of and the existence of fagottini, the use of fagottini, and so on. And then we had Giovanni with the Austrian, especially Italian focus. And now we're going a little bit back in time to the 18th century and going into the north to Hamburg. The Hamburg link evidence of small bassoon used in and around Hamburg in the 18th century, and she will present Yeah, she will present all the documentation the research team has found in Hamburg.
In this presentation, I will talk about the use of small bassoon in and around Hamburg in the 18th century, the numerous terminologies used for these instruments, and the key repertoire that shows their existence and that could further suggest their use in other works requiring multiple bassoons. 18th century Hamburg was a cultural hub attracting many composers, both visiting and resident, who exchanged ideas, theories and influences from across Europe. One significant place where these artists met was the Hamburg Opera Theatre, known as the Gänsemarkttheater. Kaiser, Mattheson, Handel, Telemann and Graupner are just a few of the musicians known to have worked and met there. The key repertoire I would like to discuss here today are only an indicator of the possible further use of small bassoons in and around this northern German region. The terminology used is varied, and as in the case of the full-blown bassoon, is not consistent. Halle and Leipzig were also important musical cities in the 18th century, with many composers first studying there. Reinhard Kaiser and Christoph Graupner both studied with Johann Kuhnau in Leipzig and later ended up in Hamburg, collaborating on 6 operas together. Sackhoff educated several notable composers in Halle, the most famous of which was Handel, who took on the post of organist in Halle's Dome in 1702, where Sackhoff was cantor. Handel is known to have used parts of Sackhoff's compositions in his own works and was highly influenced by him. In 1703, Handel went to Hamburg to take up the position as violinist and harpsichordist in the Hamburg Opera Orchestra, where he composed several operas and met the composers Mattheson, Kaiser and Graupner. Mattheson was a leading figure in Hamburg's cultural scene. He was born and worked most of his life in the city at the opera from a young age. Alongside his professional diplomatic career, he wrote theoretical works about music and was cantor of the Hamburg Dome from 1718 until 1728. Kaiser then took over this post. Mattheson composed 8 operas and numerous cantatas and oratorios, one of which, Das Größte in den Kleinen, 1722, is a significant work showing small bassoon use within Hamburg. Here we can see, in a selected list of repertoire, that there is a range of terminology used throughout the works. The 2 main terms, bassonetto and fagottino, and their collective terms refer to octave-size instruments, which were the most commonly found size of instrument in the early 18th century. There are also 2 works in this list which use the term Fagotte or Fagotto, a Telemann cantata Abscheuliche Tiefe des großen Verderbens and Graupner's Die Liebe sehe nicht falsch, both of which use alto clef for the bassoon parts. The earliest work which makes use of 2 bassonetti is Sackhoff's Easter cantata Dies ist der Tag, composed in around 1700. Although this work was not composed in Hamburg itself, it shows a similarity in instrumentation to 2 other cantatas, one by Telemann, Mit Gott in Gnadenwundern stehen, and Keeling's Wer Gott will dort ewig sehen, 1728. These cantatas use horns and bassonetti often together, or in the case of Keeling, bassonetti or horns, meaning the bassonetti could take on a horn-like role. It seems most likely that bassonetti were octave fagottini, but pitched in tiefkammerton, and not small dulcians due to the low pitch, used for both bassonetti and oboe parts, and the fact that Sackhoff uses the French term hautbois and basson. We can see this from the fact the bassonetti are written in F major, and the strings and basso continuo in D major. This is also the case in Telemann's cantata Mit Gott in Gnadenwundern stehen, where the bassonetti are written in G major and the organ in E major. The first page of the manuscript of Dies ist der Tag offers a very interesting insight into the terminology used at that time. In the instrumentation listed in the top right-hand corner of the manuscript, Sackhoff lists 2 bassonetti and basson, along with other instruments, but in the first 2 staves on the left, Sackhoff refers to the 2 bassonetti as simply basson 1 and basson 2. In May 2021, we were invited to perform this cantata with Cantus Thuringia in Weimar, as part of the Handel Festspiel in Halle. We performed it on both the original anonymous instrument FT40 and one of our 3D copies of this instrument. This performance opportunity allowed us to make some interesting observations. Also uses the term bassonetti to refer to small-sized bassoons, and the cantata Mit Gott im Gnadenbunden stehen is similar in instrumentation to Sakow's cantata, making use of two bassonetti or chalumeau with other winds and strings. This is one of the works that will be performed in tonight's Symposium concert. The bassonetti, oboes and upper strings are written in the same key, G major, suggesting the upper strings tuned to the wind's pitch. The canto and basso continuo lines, on the other hand, are written in E major, showing the difference in the pitch standard for the organ being used at the time. There is a violino part in bass clef written in the same key as the bassonetti, meaning the string bass instrument tuning was also the same as the bassonetti. Unlike Sackhoff and Keeling's cantatas, which both notate the bassonetti in treble clef, Telemann notates the bassonetti in bass clef, an octave below their sounding pitch. In all arias, the bassonetti play and have independent roles, accompanying along with the oboes and horns in the A sections only. The exception to this is in number 5, duet for canto and basso, where in the B section florid melismatic lines in the two vocal parts are accompanied by both the bassonetti and strings, playing a chorale-like line in unison at the same octave. In the A section, the horns and oboes play simple accompaniment, and the bassonetti have 16th note figures which interplay with a carpet of pizzicato notes in the strings. The final chorale does not appear in the manuscript score, and is only found in the parts, both instrumental and vocal. Keeling's cantata Wer Gott will dort ewig sehen in 1728 uses similar instrumentation to that of Telemann and Sackhoff's cantatas. The manuscript is dated 1 year after Keeling died in 1727. One can only guess whether this was a copy made by someone else, or whether he planned a performance of the work in 1728, but it was not to be. There is very little information about Keeling, other than that he was born in Benningen and worked as cantor in Brücken and in Stolleberg-Harz near Halle from 1712. Geographically, it seems likely that Keeling and Sackhoff could have been aware of each other's works, and therefore also bassonetti use. The term fagottino is probably the clearest terminology, and the most significant work for bassoons, both small and full size, using this term is the oratorio by Mattheson, Das Große in dem Kleinen, composed in 1722 when Mattheson was cantor of St. Mary's Cathedral in Hamburg. This substantial work sees the terms fagottini and fagotti used side by side, but also the term bassono. The first time fagottini are mentioned by name in the oratorio is on page 49 of the manuscript, in the aria of Jesus con violetta e fagottino al unisono, traversi all'ottava di sopra, which makes use of the violas, fagottini and traversos together as obbligato instruments with the solo vocal line and basso continuo. The term fagottini then also appears on page 55, in the aria of Ardito, where the texture is very much a tutti unisono texture. We see here all string parts are doubled by wind instruments, including the violas, who are doubled by the fagottini. Although the appearance of the term fagottino is very late in the oratorio, I don't believe that they just played in these two arias. The first page of the Sinfonia and the title pages of the oratorio do not mention any instrumentation at all. In the opening grave, there are simply two instrumental treble clef parts, an alto clef part, and a basso continuo part. This suggests that if no specific instrument is mentioned in an instrumental voice in the score, it was meant to be played to a D. Mattheson mentions in very selected places where only violas play, suggesting there were other instruments on the alto clef line. As we see in the Chor der Jungen, the term viol appears next to the alto clef line. He is also quite specific when he only wants certain instruments of the bass group to play, including using the terms bassono or bassono solo together with oboe soli, but often he uses terms such as tutti gli strum, tutti li bassi, or just tutti. These instrumentation considerations may eventually in performance become much clearer and open our minds to different possibilities when considering instrumentation in other large Baroque works, especially those requiring multiple bassoons. Works such as Handel's oratorio Alexander's Feast, which requires 3 bassoons, or Kaiser's works requiring multiple bassoons. During the time in which Mattheson was cantor in Hamburg, Kaiser was working in Copenhagen as master of the Danish Royal Chapel from 1721 to 1727. Prior to taking up the position in Copenhagen, Kaiser mentions in 1720 that the King of Denmark has 8 such bassoons and bassonets in his Grenadier Guards, which are extremely pompous and pleasing to hear. In the same year, he offered in a letter to the court of Württemberg 2 suites for bassoon octet, which he had recently composed. Unfortunately, these suites at present cannot be found. In 1728, Kaiser succeeded Mattheson as cantor of St. Mary's Cathedral and composed several works which employed the forces of multiple bassoons in obbligato roles. This suggests that when Kaiser employed 5 bassoons, such as in the aria Geloso sospetto tormenta from his opera Die edelmütige Octavia for the Hamburg Opera, he most probably required bassoons of different sizes. In the repertoire list, there is another cantata by Telemann, Abscheuliche Tiefe des großen Verderbens, which uses the term Fagotte, but is entirely written in alto clef, and if played at the notated octave, exceeds the range of the full-size bassoon. Octaves, it seems, in the early 18th century were very interchangeable. Often in scores, violas, or even sometimes violins, were simply asked to double the bass line, which of course they would do at their own register. It seems that many composers of the time, such as Telemann, were experimenting with the sound colour of octaves. There are examples of bassoons dubbing violins in Telemann's Tageszeiten, Hamburg, 1757. With this reasoning, then one could ask why couldn't full-size bassoon play an octave lower than written in fagotto parts written in alto clef, such as in Telemann's Abscheuliche Tiefe or the Nouvelles Sonatinas notated in French violin clef. This depends upon the written bass line and whether the melodic line crosses it if played an octave lower. In the case of the Nouvelles Sonatinas, the only existing basso continuo part for the violin version works with no crossing. If this basso continuo is used to accompany a full-size bassoon playing the melody in its own register, the lines unfortunately cross, something which is avoided when performing the work on fagottino. This is also the case with Abscheuliche Tiefe. If played on the fagottino at the written alto clef octave, bass line crossing is no longer a problem. This cantata makes use of violetta or fagotto as strumento primo and traverso as strumento secondo. Both wind instruments are in obbligato roles throughout, together with the solo alto vocal line and basso continuo. There are only 3 movements in this short cantata, 2 da capo arias separated by a short recitative in the middle. The second aria is a fiery allegro sigh in which the fagottino alternates between waves of accompanying sixteenths and sections doubling the vocal line. The B section brings a beautiful moment of stillness with floating sustained notes from both winds depicting the text Da Jesus mir zum Vers beschieden, so lieg und schlaf ich, ganz mit Frieden, and shows the fagottino to be also an instrument that can be delicate and solistic. There is much still to be considered and discovered about this repertoire. As we bring this music to life once again with the copies of these small bassoons, much can be learned about instrumental textures of the 18th century, and hopefully this can open our ears and minds to a different sound world, including small-sized bassoons. Finally, to finish, I would like to let Telemann's Abscheuliche Tiefe speak for itself. A full version of this performance can be found on our website under Multimedia and other videos. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Des großen Verdammens,
Thank you, Zoe. And we have seen the baby already, huh? Its performance. Any questions? Yeah, they're a little bit shy. I learned this week in an audience, in another lecture at the university, that normally in this moment, one should say, okay, let's make a few minutes of murmuring, murmeln. And that means that you have to ask or discuss with your neighbor something about the lecture, and after a few minutes, you're allowed to have a question. I found this quite didactic, but perhaps we don't need this game.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and also for the music. I would like to ask you if you could tell us a little bit and explain a little bit how was the personal experience playing these instruments, because it was the first concert where we were playing these copies that we were making, and it was the first time we played it in public. Leticia and yourself played there. So if you could explain a little bit of the struggles that you had with the reeds, the vocals, the this or that, it would be very... Thank you.
Well, first of all, when we played the Zarkov in Weimar, that was a very interesting... I had nightmares about whether it was actually going to work or not, and working out the transposition, of course, because it's pitched a third different to all the other parts. And I remember Letizia turning around to me after playing the first movement and went, "It works!" So, but it's amazing, the sonority of these instruments is incredible. But of course, you have a different feeling in your mouth when you play these instruments because the reed is so small. And often, as a full-size bassoon player, we have a tendency to just go, oh, and let everything go in the mouth and everything. But here, you have to have a lot. It's a bit more, even more like singers. The tension is a bad word, but in German, Haltung is a good way of thinking about it. And the way you hold the soft palates in your mouth to be able to play these instruments at the right pitch. Of course, it's very flexible. And, sorry. I'm not sure how coherent I am because I haven't had much sleep the last few months. Every 2 hours being woken up. So, and then the Abscheuliche Tiefe. There's also it's very difficult. I had lots of high notes to play, and we're still learning a lot about these instruments and what reeds work, and also boccals. There's very few surviving boccals, and if there are, do they really belong to those instruments? So it's still a work in progress. I'm really looking forward to seeing more of this repertoire with the original instruments. It would be very interesting.
It was a nice organ. Is this in a church in Hamburg?
It's here.
This is here.
Except that it was before it was renovated, so...
But it was before the renovation.
And the floor doesn't creak now, I don't think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Please.
Aurea asked you how was your feeling. I wonder what was the impression of the other players involved in that project about Fagottinos.
I think everyone was extremely excited to actually hear this sound because nobody had really heard it before. I know that Claire Gennewein, who's the flute player in Abscheuliche Tiefe, she was like, yes, we have to do this project, we have to do it, because it just opens up such a different sound world than we're used to. And actually, when we were doing the Zakov, we had a little bit of arguments about the tutti movements, because the oboes are not actually written at the beginning of the cantata, only in one movement. And it follows on from a very obligato aria for the oboes, for the bassonetti, and suddenly they have to play very exposed. But it just in the tutti, they just say tutti. And it just needs everyone, play everyone. And we did one of the chorales we did do with the full oboes and bassonetti, and it suddenly you had so much more depth of sound because you had this middle octave, which usually would only be one poor viola playing along, and so it's quite. If I'd had more time, I would have compared the two recordings of the chorale with the full tutti besetzung, and the one where we didn't play. We felt very strange just sitting there doing nothing when everyone was playing away. But maybe we can do a recording where we hear the full version with the bassonetti.
Recording would be one possibility. Concerts would be better. I personally found the sound today not perfect. It was a little bit too not too good to distinguish the instruments. But I must perhaps add that brass instruments are used just to sitting around and waiting for a few bars to play. Yeah. Don't complain as a bassoon player.
I think also we're not used to recording small bassoons. Yeah. I mean, when you record a full-size bassoon, many sound producers, they also place the microphones in very strange places, and you think, well, it doesn't just come from up above. We have lots of tone holes that are producing sound, so it's also an experience thing on how to record as well and hear these instruments.
New challenges.
Sorry, can you specify which instrument you played in Telemann?
I knew this would be a question. Well, actually, this is actually an instrument from Wolf, Guntram Wolf. When we first started the project, we went to visit Christoph Peter in Winterthur. And Christoph Peter was very involved in the reproduction of the modern fagottino with Guntram. And he has several of these instruments. But we're not sure whether he really copied them faithfully to exact measurements or whether these are instruments that he's changed around to get to a certain pitch. It's unclear, really. Because I think he did a lot of experiments with the historical ones before he went into making the modern fagottinos. Yeah.
So the last video was with a Wolf copy, yeah? And you've played also some of the originals or some of the replicas that have been made more recently?
Yeah, we have two sharers which we copied. One sharer, in the first 3D copy, we copied two instruments, Anonymous, which we played in Zakov. We figured out, it would just about work at 392, so that we allow for the pitch difference. And then there was another sharer, and that one is very, very similar to what I was playing. Also in the feel of how it played. So that's, very nice instruments.
Yeah, that's my question, is how they compare in the feeling of the Wolf and the more recent.
Oh, very, very, very similar. So which kind of, it feels to me like he did copy them faithfully.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Bravo, thank you for the music and the research. I would like to ask you about the qualities of the instrument. You mentioned very technically with the writing, you have fagotti and in alto clef, so it must be a fagottino. And would you go as far as telling any rhetorical devices of any particular quality of these instruments related to this vocal music?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last bit.
Since you're dealing with obbligato repertoire, would you add some thoughts about what does it mean to have a fagottino as a sound, or perhaps it's too vague?
It's very interesting. As bassoonists, we play mostly in the bass line, and of course later on we play the tenor register on our full-size instruments. But of course, it's very different to suddenly be like an oboist or a flute player. I mean, I play traverso as well, so I have some experience. But it's suddenly we're put into the limelight, and also the feeling of how loud these instruments are. I know as a baroque bassoonist, we often try and hide in the bass line somewhere. But this instrument you can't hide, and it's a totally different sound that you realise, to you it seems very much more direct sound, and it like an oboe or a da caccia, and you have to get used to this, that it doesn't actually go wah too much. It's actually quite subtle when you, for instance, when you have it with a traverso. So it's a sound you have to get used to, and yeah.
This is interesting. It's not only about the instrument and the music, but also the role model as a musician for you bassoon players to change a little bit now, to be more and have a spotlight on what you're doing. Yeah, interesting experience.
Just started to continue on that line of questioning, and I realized that the sample size in terms of repertoire is so small. But in this German repertoire that you've demonstrated to us, of course, is there any relationship in the text, in this sort of, is there a theme in the texts between these three cantatas, or a sort of morality lesson, or is there a relationship in the ecclesiastical calendar, anything which would maybe link
I must admit I haven't gone into that depth yet with things. I mean, this is the thing, we're only scratching the surface of this repertoire. We have, so many times we see them handle oratorio, which requires 3 bassoons, and they employ 1, and you think, what? So we've got to rethink. We've also got to get conductors to rethink the sound world of these instruments, and also not just full-size bassoons. We've got to look at this. There's so much more work to do, really. I think it could be many more years on this.
This is a good closing remark, because it's the end of the project, but it's the beginning of the discovery of these instruments and the possibilities. I would propose that we now have the coffee break, which is less stressy than this morning. I think we have half an hour. I don't know, I have to look at half an hour. And we will meet here 3:45 sharp, again for the next lecture. And thank you again, Matthew.
It's also difficult because, as Andy alluded to many times in these different presentations she did over the years, that these things are so flexible. It's really hard just to try and be like, oh yeah, someone can figure out. And in the end, they play relatively It was you who got the 3,000 petal. You didn't get it. No, he's just translating my thing. Because I was there in January and he was like, oh, we have it, but it's not available. And then when I came back, he said it was a one. Maybe try them all. No, I haven't. I just made out the coffee from the and the next one. He was amazing. And then he suddenly wants to laugh. Oh no! And I spent money which I don't unfortunately went out. But
So you have
And so my colleague just next to me, bring your pens. So I didn't realise his orchestral had been like used like silver tone holds in it, and a cookie, and a modern chord, and he sounded wrong.
Yeah.
Like next to me, he sounded wrong, and we swapped instruments, and he was like, how the hell do you play this?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's you got to feel like it really is obviously just you got to support.
I tried the 3000 series that Nelly had been given. It was found in someone's attic, and they no rest of it. Really poor condition, but it sealed enough for you to try it. But of course, no lining on the tone. In 15 minutes, yes. And I was surprised at how, just the approach test 1, 2.
Turn it on. Okay. Oh.
When he's speaking. Yeah. I will do that.
Ja, ich rede auf Deutsch.
Die Ankündigung auf Deutsch.
Wenn Sie wollen.
Welcome to the last part of the afternoon session, and because the next paper will be in German, I will switch into German. Um diesen ersten Tag zu beschließen, obwohl das ist eigentlich nur ein Amuse-Bouche, wie wir in der Schweiz sagen, für das, was heute Abend um 19 Uhr hier folgen wird, begrüße ich den letzten Vortragenden aus Graz, David Gasch. Er ist, wenn man die Literatur verfolgt, gut bekannt bereits in vielen der hier schon angesprochenen Themen. Er hat sowohl Musik studiert, Klarinette, wie auch Musikwissenschaft und hat sich vor allen Dingen auch auf etwas konzentriert, was wir gleich hören werden, nämlich Harmoniemusik als eines der Themen. Symphonisches Blasmusik etc. Er ist, Sie können das im Abstract genauer lesen, bevor ich das alles vorlese, da auch sehr aktiv. Er ist auch eben als Musiker, als Forscher, wie auch im Museum, im Kunsthistorischen Museum in Wien tätig in der Vermittlung. Also hat diese verschiedenen Kompetenzen von praktischen, wissenschaftlichen und auch vermittelnden Kompetenzen. Das Thema seines Vortrags wurde auch in den Vorträgen am ganzen Tag eigentlich immer wieder mal angesprochen, nämlich das Thema Harmoniemusik, was nicht zu verwechseln werden sollte mit Militärmusik, was dann nochmal eine Spezialgeschichte wäre, obwohl es da vielfältige Verbindungen gibt. Und das ist auch genau das Thema, der Titel des Vortrags, die Frage des Tenorfagotts im Kontext der Harmonie, türkischen Musik und Harmoniemusik. Herr Gasch, bitte.
Dankeschön. Dankeschön auch für die Einladung und fast die Ehre, heute da zu sein. Weil ich bin kein Fachmann und Spezialist wie viele von euch über Fagott und Fagottino. Aber ich muss ehrlich, am Anfang sollte sehen, was ist ein Fagottino? Sollte ein bisschen selbst nachlesen, nachforschen. Und heute werde ich, wie angekündigt wurde, über diese Harmoniemusik und natürlich die Verbindung mit Tenorfagott oder Fagottino. Deswegen, das wäre ein bisschen mein Plan, diese aktuelle Forschung über Harmoniemusik. Es wird ein bisschen ein Überblick, was ist Harmoniemusik. Natürlich schwer zu tun in ein paar Minuten. Und dann, es wurde schon heute diese Zitate so erwähnt. Ich werde nochmal dann erzählen, was wäre ein bisschen dieser Einsatz des Tenorsfagotts im Repertoire Richtung Harmonie, Militärmusik. Und auch ein paar Kommentare über ein Instrument in Wien, ein Fagottino in diese Sammlung alter Musikinstrumente. So, erstens ein bisschen ein Überblick, kurz gefasste Geschichte über die Harmoniemusik. Natürlich Ursprung, Erstellung, das ist nicht diese Stadt, diesem Land, an diesem Tag ist fast unmöglich. Das ist mehrere Einflüsse und man kann schon sehen, am Ende des 17. Jahrhunderts, Anfang des 18. Jahrhunderts, in diesen Jahren 1720, es passiert was. Man merkt Berichte, Bilder, Komponisten, das ist schon klar. Und es sind schon viele Besetzungen und Harmonien in religiöse Musik, Kirchenmusik, Militärmusikbereiche, das schon nachweisbar. Steht hier vielleicht ein erster Einfluss, kommt aus Frankreich. Und zwar diese Grand Hautbois, diese 12 Hautbois-Bande. Militärmusik am Hof, der Ludwig XIV., das war wirklich ein Vorbild dann für ganz Europa. Man muss ehrlich sein und man trifft oder man sieht dann in kürzer Zeit dann solche Hautbois-Bande, Korps oder Chor oder sowas in Dresden, in Stuttgart, andere dann Höfe in Deutschland, was heute Deutschland ist. Man sieht hier vielleicht noch mehr ganz genau, das ist ein Gemälde, wo diese 12 Oboen deutlich zu sehen sind. Dann über die Besetzung, diese Idee, wieso Oboe, Fagott und Hörner zusammen zum Beispiel. Es gibt hier mehrere Zitate, fällt ein bisschen die Zeit. Man sieht 1690, aus Dresden, diese General vom Sparherr Graf und so hatte schon für die Krieger, für die Militärmusik, diese Schallemei oder Oboe sagt selbst, mit Fagott zusammen. Und auch es wurde oft zitiert, vielleicht komme ich kurz zurück, steht hier, das ist auch eine Quelle von meinem Kollegen, 16 früh auch, Quelle, wo man sieht deutlich, es gibt diese Chor-Oboisten, so teils Waldhörnern hatten. Interessant, dann es gibt Oboisten, auch gemeint Fagotte dazu, mit Hörner, diese reine Bläserbesetzung. Und oft wird zitiert, immer wenn sie mit Harmoniemusik sich beschäftigt, diese Quelle von Fleming 1726, wo deutlich gesagt ist, es gibt in dieser Infanteriemusik über denen Oboisten haben noch 2 Waldhornisten mit einstimmen müssen, welches ein recht angenehme Harmonie verursacht. Und dann ist ein bisschen deutlich oder kommt dieses Begriff auf Harmoniemusik als auch oder Harmonie als vielleicht Besetzung. Es ist doch zu notieren auch eine große Vorliebe in Böhmen, Moravien, vor allem auch in Böhmen für das Horn. Es gibt viele auch Anekdote, Geschichte und deswegen wird auch schnell das Horn in dieser Besetzung dann auch verwendet. Wenn man sieht, Richtung Wien wäre auch eine ganze Geschichte, gibt es auch schon in barocker Zeit solche Oberwandern am Hof. Hier ist ein letztes Beispiel, wir sind diese 1745, die Krönung von Franz I. und Maria Theresia, Rückkehr, und man sieht so ein Detail, das ist mehr eine Militärbesetzung, dann sind Flöte und so weiter, aber auf dieser Ecke sind deutlich zu sehen Hörner, Hautbois und Fagotte. Dazu auch parallel, alles ist parallel, ne? Ein neues Repertoire und die Rolle von den Komponisten. Es gibt eine ganze Generation von Barockkomponisten, von Bieber bis Wagenseil. Sie hat immer mehr sich mit Instrumentalmusik und Bläser beschäftigt. Es gibt Concerto Grosso, Trio der Kamera, solche Kammer oder so. Und wo man sieht, es gibt Serpent, Zink, Flöte und man nennt in die Musikgeschichte allgemein die Emanzipation der Instrumentalmusik, was auch natürlich stimmt und immer eine wichtige Rolle für die Bläser. Und natürlich kommt dann diese Idee. Und man sagt allgemein auch in dieser Musikgeschichte, der erste Stück für wirklich eine Harmonie wäre dieser Marsch von Johann Georg Christian Störl, wurde von 1711 datiert. Ja, Datierung manchmal ist fragwürdig, natürlich später, aber eben diese erste Hälfte des 18. Jahrhunderts. Und hat man diese 12 Oboe, Hörner und ein Fagott. Aber es gibt sowieso fast in selben Zeit die Ouvertüren-Suite von Telemann, auch für die gleiche Besetzung. Ich möchte auch kurz dann ein Beispiel, das war mit Studenten in Wien. Das ist der Marsch von Stern. Das war so. Das war ein Workshop, das war auch so eine kleine Harmoniemusiktagung in der Musikuni, Privatmusikuni Wien mit den Oboist, weiß nicht, ob ihr ihn kennt, der Andreas Helm. Gut, andere Geschichte. Aber gut, man wird heute nicht überreden, über was ist der Marsch und wie klingt und so, nur als Beispiel. Dann sagt oft, für mich ist ein bisschen diese Entstehung so wie ein Baum mit seinen Wurzeln. Ne? Es kommt mehrere Einflüsse und dann kommt in diese 17, 20, 30 oder sowas die Harmonie oder Harmoniemusik, die Begriffe natürlich ist doch das noch eine andere Frage. Dann, es gibt, nochmal gesagt, Kirchenmusik, Militärmusik und dann taucht auch diese adelige Harmonie oder Harmonien für die Unterhaltung, um die Hofmusik zu begleiten. Womit? Mit Freiluftmusik, Tafelmusik, mit Arrangements von Opern, von allen und auch Originalstücke. Bekannte Beispiele, Grafen Morzin mit Haydn, Josef Haydn, Pachter, die Fürsten Schwarzenberg oder auch Esterhazy. Dann es gibt so einen Höhepunkt, die Blütezeit, kann man so sagen, der Harmoniemusik ist diese 70er Jahren bis, sagen wir, Wiener Kongress mehr oder weniger. Es gibt hunderte Harmonien überall in diese deutschsprachige Länder, Höfe und so. Das ist doch das zu belegen. Mit ein bisschen, können wir das sagen, eine Institution, die Gründung, die kaiserliche und königliche Harmonie von der Josef II. 1782. Das ist auch am selben Zeit ein bisschen eine Standardbesetzung geworden, diese Oktett, weil wir kurz darüber noch reden, und ein Vorbild für viele Höfe. Dann ändert sich die Situation, die napoleonischen Kriege. Dann ist finanziell Not, ja. Viele Kapellen wurden entlassen, dazu auch Harmonie oder sogar reduziert oft eine Harmonie. Auch ist eine andere Richtung, weil wir sind Militärmusik, ja. Das ist Krieg, man braucht Militärmusik. Die Harmonie ist immer dabei, aber die Besetzungen sind ein bisschen immer größer und auch Richtung türkische Musik, oder das ist immer diese Übergangsphase. Dann, es gibt den Niedergang, das wäre ein bisschen nach und nach, das ist auch nicht auf einmal alles, nach dem Wiener Kongress 1815. Das ist sehr unterschiedlich zwischen den Orten, den Städtehöfen. Es gibt noch sehr aktive und fast neue Harmonien. Ein bekanntes auch Beispiel ist beim Liechtenstein mit Sedlak, ist ganz aktiv lange Zeit. Und der Endpunkt wäre in dieser 1830, 40 mehr oder weniger, weil es gibt doch die Auflösung von vielen großen Harmonien, die kaiserliche Harmonie, die eine Harmonie in Sonderhäusern und mehrere auch dazu. Ja, man merkt, es gibt dann diesen Übergang zwischen Harmonie türkische und dann diese Militärkapelle, wie was dann im 19. Jahrhundert dann wird. Das ist nur ein bisschen überzahlt, das ist so für mich ein Projekt, ich versuche mein eigenes Lexikon der Harmoniemusik, ne, mit Komponisten und Harmonien, und bis jetzt habe ich sicher 120 und mehr Harmonien dann schon festgestellt und 500 Komponisten, Arrangeurs für auch solche Besetzungen und Repertoire. Auch kurz, aber interessant wäre auch dazu, was ist Harmoniemusik über Terminologie? Wenn man fragt einen Student, ist eine Besetzung, ist ein Repertoire, ist eine Gattung, ist was? Ist alles eigentlich, am selben Zeit. Nur was zum Zitieren, ganz typisch, ja, auch bekanntes Zitat von Schönfeld 1796, wo es sagt ich zitiere, die Militärmusik ist entweder die gewöhnliche Feldmusik oder die türkische Musik. Die Feldmusik oder sogenannte Harmonie, welche man auch Banda nennt, besteht aus 2 Waldhörner, 2 Fagotten und 2 Oboen. 2 Sätze, und Militärmusik ist ein Banda, ist Feldmusik, ist Harmonie, man weiß nicht ganz genau. Ne? Es war schon damals diese Verwirrung, die es auch gibt, und diese Titel waren austauschbar. Aber es gibt trotzdem Terminologie, eine Terminologie mehr für Militärmusik, Feldmusik, türkische Musik, oder eine Terminologie mehr für Tafelmusik oder Harmonie, vollstimmige Harmonie zum Beispiel und so weiter. Weil es gibt immer die Frage, wenn man diese Musik studiert, zu welchem Anlass spielte diese Harmonie. Es gibt eine enge Verbindung zwischen Besetzung, Repertoire, Funktion, Anlass. Diese gibt es dann später nicht mehr. Ne? Sonate, man schreibt eine Sonate, egal wann wird es dann aufgeführt fast, aber bei der Harmoniemusik nicht. Es gibt eine wichtige Rolle. Dazu über Repertoire. Könnte in 3 oder 4 große Gruppen, so man kann sagen, einteilen. Die Militärmusik, Märchen, Ouvertüre, kleine Stücke und so weiter. Originalwerke, Divertimento, Serenade, Partita, Notturno. Auch interessant, es wäre auch gut mit mehr Zeit diese Terminologie zu erläutern, weil auch der Titel der Partitur hat auch eine Funktion. Ja? Es ist auch eine liegt zusammen mit der Instrumentierung oder mit dem Anlass oder mit der sogar Notturno. Man weiß, wie in der Nacht um 10 Uhr, und das ist kein Divertimenti und das ist keine Serenade, vielleicht jetzt um 17, 18 und so weiter. Ne? Das geht so weit auch mit dem Titel. Dann kommt die große Menge, die Bearbeitungen und Arrangements. Gibt es keine gute Hofkapelle oder heute Bibliothek, Archiv ohne Dutzende, Hunderte, Tausende Arrangements von Opern, von Ballett, Symphonien, Klaviersonate, das ist wirklich unglaublich. Und auch dazu, das steht hier nicht nicht vergessen, die Kirchenmusik. Ja, das ist auch ein großes Repertoire für die Harmonie, ja, diese Messe, Laudatio und wirklich, es gibt auch tausende Noten in diese Richtung. Jetzt über Gebrauch oder welcher Anlass. Alles, was möglich ist, in Klammer. Von Militär, Kirchenmusik bis Akademien, Konzerte, Privatanlässe. Man sieht auch hier dieses Bild, wurde von einem Kollegen von Kurz fast im Flohmarkt gefunden. Aber das ist gut, weil das kommt auch mit ein bisschen dieses Zitat zusammen, nochmal von Schönfeld, sagt, es war diese Stadt, diese Gewohnheit, diese eine Harmonie zu enthalten, zu besitzen. Aber jetzt gibt es etwas nicht mehr, außer beim Fürst Schwarzenberg, Fürst Kraselkowitsch oder hier zitiert auch in der Mitte. Der Herr Baron von Braun hält eine eigene Harmonie zu Tafelmusik, ist noch eine Harmonie von Hoftreter Jan, aber diese Harmonie ist auch bekannt für seine Konzerte, ist Augarten, ein Park in Wien im Sommer, oder sagt auch, dann ist doch sehr gut in Privatakademien zu brauchen. Jetzt ein bisschen Starkpunkt über Besetzung. Auch versuchen auf Tenorfagott. Hat Tenorfagott mit oder nicht mitgespielt? Auf einer Seite habt ihr gesagt, die Militärbesetzung, große Besetzung mit Blech, Schlaginstrumente. Andererseits ist diese, sagen wir, Standard- oder adelige Harmonie. Haben wir auch gesehen, am Anfang wäre mehr ein Bläserquintett, schnell natürlich ein Sextett, 2 Oboen und Hörner und Fagotte. Dann später ist natürlich immer die Frage, wann ist die Klarinette ganz genau, aber ein Oktett, diese Jahre 1770, 80 ist die Klarinette fast sicher dabei. Und sagen wir auch schnell, die traditionelle Besetzung, die Standardbesetzung ist diese Bläseroktett. Ja? Und dann mit auch ein Bassinstrument ist auch ganz andere Frage. Vielleicht noch kurz auch ein Beispiel. Und zwar, das ist ich mag dieses Stück, habe ich noch nicht persönlich gespielt, das ist eine Bearbeitung, normalerweise anonym, von 1810 von der Beethovens Klaviersonate. Mit Kontrafagott, original. Leider weiter. Jetzt spricht der Musiker, ja, nicht der Musikwissenschaftler, aber es ist nicht objektiv. Beim Konzert klingt fantastisch, weil man spürt mit Kontrafagott der Klang wirklich von der Harmonie. Ja. Jetzt ist nur ein kurzes Bild, ist auch ein ganzes Thema über die Flöte. Wieso ist nicht die Flöte immer fix bei dieser Standardbesetzung? Das ist vielleicht später eine Frage. Oder auch zu zeigen, es gibt aus Frankreich diese 2 Bücher und so, ganz mit Schwerpunkt, wie kann man für Harmonie komponieren. Ganz interessant, ja. Wie kann man von Klang und von Tonanfänge und so von Rösser und von Franke. Auch in dieser Geschichte Besetzung der musikalischen Lexikon von Koch, ja, Harmoniemusik zum Beispiel, auch diese Besetzung, Bläser, Oktett oder auch über Oboistenchor, wir sind mehr im Militärmusikbereich, deswegen, er sagt doch, oft ist noch eine Flöte, 1 oder 2 Trompeten, ein Quarzfagott oder ein Serpent damit verbunden, ja, größere Besetzungen. Kurz, weil das ist auch ein eigenes Thema, ganz interessant, türkische Musik, weil das gehört auch dazu. türkische Musik ist, kurz gesagt, machen schnell, ja? Kurz ist Militärmusik. Wird oft von Offizieren dann auch unterstützt oder finanziert. Und das ist auch Repertoire wie Harmonie, Arrangements, Original, Märchen und andere Stücke. Wird auch trotzdem diese türkische Musik im Sommer draußen. Das ist eine Freiluftmusik für die Unterhaltung draußen. Hier ist auch ein paar zeitgenössische Quellen. Und man kann so sagen, auch vielleicht zum Hören, letztes Stück in diesem Repertoire, ein bekanntes Stück von Spohr, das Notturno für Harmonie und Janitscharen Musik. Vielleicht nur zum Schluss, das sind diese die Reprise, das war ein bisschen euch ein bisschen zu aufwecken, ja? Falls. Nur kurz, ob da jemand Interesse hätte, ich habe kurz in der RISM gesehen, was gibt in der Schweiz? Ja, gibt es auch sogar bei diesem Kloster Eisiedeln so Bestände, auch über Harmonie, das heißt Stücke, doch, das ist, ich glaube, doch noch zum Vorstellen, ja, einfach so. Jetzt kommen wir zu dieser Frage, Einsatz der Tenorsfagos in diesem Repertoire. Auch wie gesagt, das ist, wie das man sieht, für viele bekannte Zitate, heute auch schon erwähnt oder gesehen. Erste von Zedler. Was für mich interessant ist, er spricht über ein Bassinstrument. Was ist auch für die Harmoniemusik ganz wichtig? Bassstimme. Ich werde kurz sagen, das ist ein Problem bei der Harmonie, war immer diese Bassstimme. Nicht die Tenorstimme oder die Tenorlage, sondern die Bassstimme. Oder wurde auch gesagt, diese Bericht, allgemeine musikalische Zeitung, 1815, es geht um ein Benefizkonzert in Wien, wurde über diese Fagottist geredet, diese Variationen, komponiert und gespielt von Zeika und dort diese kurze Beschreibung über das Tenor-Fagott. Was auch ganz interessant ist, wurde noch nicht heute erwähnt, von Berlioz, aber er hat auch gesagt, das ist, war heute dieser Vortrag über diese Verbindung, vielleicht, wer weiß, zwischen den Instrumenten von Savary und auch was hier Berlioz sagt, das ist die gleiche Zeit. Er sagt, okay, zum Beispiel dieses Instrument spielt in F, oder dieses Instrument ist in den meisten Orchestern nicht vorhanden. Das Englischhorn ersetzt es vorteilhaft durch seine 2 höhere Oktaven. Und dann spricht Berlioz über seinen Klang. Ganz interessant vielleicht zu notieren, es würde in der Militärmusik von vortrefflicher Wirkung sein. Das ist fast von ihm. Das ist eine Bemerkung, das wäre wie ein Vorschlag, nur als Komponist und so, oder das ist mehr eine Beobachtung. Dann ist vielleicht die Frage. Das heißt, ich habe beobachtet, ist eine gute Wirkung in der Militärmusik. Aber auch, er sagt gleich danach, für solche, was für heute ein Blasorchester wäre, ist ein großer Nachteil. Weil damals war diese Idee, Blasmusik oder Militärkapelle ist laut, scharfe Musik, das muss, ja. Und das Tenorfagott, das keinen Platz, ist zu sanft, in Klammer, mit seinem Klang. Auch fahrbar, nur für Solo eingesetzt, zum Beispiel. Der Kommentar von Rede. Und auch eine letzte habe ich auch gefunden, nochmal im Bereich Militärmusik, Andreas Nemetz, Musikschule für Militärmusik 1860. Er sagt auch kurz, es gibt mehrere Arten der Fagotte. Zweitens, der Tenorfagott, dessen Töne um ein Quinte höher klingen. Punkt. Mehr auch, wir wissen nicht. Das ist doch so. Wenn man sieht solche immer Zitaten oder Berichte und so, man spricht immer über Register, klingt eine Oktave, ein Quart und so höher, man spricht über seinen Klang, seinen Tonumfang, manchmal über seine Wirkung, aber man spricht fast nie über Repertoire. Das ist ja auch ein bisschen, auch schade, habt auch gesehen, steht schon, das wurde auch die letzte Vorträge, ich habe selbst viel gelernt, danke davon, ja. Habt gesehen zum Beispiel diese Variationen von Zeika oder das bekannteste Beispiel wird auch, freue mich sehr, das zu hören, weil das sollte super klingen, diese ganz ungewöhnliche Partitur oder Musik von Trost und so. Aber im Repertoire der musikalischen Literatur gibt es, ich habe zumindest keine anderen Beispiele sowas gefunden. Und ich muss auch ehrlich sein, ich vermute im Repertoire der Harmoniemusik, wie gesagt, ich habe keine konkreten Beispiele gefunden und ich werde auch keine konkreten Beispiele finden. Weil es gibt mehrere Gründe. Wenn man denkt, Harmoniemusik ist ein Klangkörper, der paarweise funktioniert. Sextett, 2+2+2, Oktett +2, 12 Instrumente, es ist immer zu 2. Und dann 2 Tenor, Fagott, sehr unwahrscheinlich, ja. Und auch etwas anderes, Tonumfang, Tonart, wenn im G auch, wenn ein Tenorfagott im G für ein Horn, ein Naturhorn, D, Dur, zu kompliziert, besser ein Instrument in F oder in B und so weiter. Oder auch bei der Harmonie ist die Tenorregister oder Tenorlage nicht ein Problem. Übernimmt die Hörner, ne, diese Register, oder die zweite Klarinette oder der erste Fagott und ist nicht das Problem. Mehr, wie gesagt, für die Harmonie ist das Problem die Bassstimme. Weil Fagott ist kein in sich Bassinstrument, ne? Das ist noch ein Tenorinstrument. Aber deswegen haben immer die Komponisten versuchen, ein Bassinstrument zu finden, der Serpent, später Kontrafagott. Und dann das sogar motiviert die Erfindung, Weiterentwicklung von solchen Instrumenten von Ophekleid, klingt was, Ophekleid, Bombardon bis Tuba, ne? In der Mitte des 19. Jahrhunderts. Deswegen sehr unwahrscheinlich, dass Tenorfagott Teil der Harmoniebesetzung war. Aber andere Richtung ist, wir habt auch heute viel gelesen und so, Militärbereich. Ich habe leider keine konkrete Beispiel zu sagen, in der Instrumentierung, da steht ein Tenorfagott. Aber in dieser Zeit, entweder in diese deutschsprachigen Länder, in Frankreich und so, es gibt eine Vielfalt von Instrumenten. Wirklich ist alles was möglich, in Klammer, ja. Es gibt noch keine Einheit, dann später, zweite Hälfte des 19. Jahrhunderts, gibt es Wieprecht in Preußen, gibt es Leonhard in Österreich, das ist Reformen, die Militärmusik, was ist Regimentmusik, was ist und so, aber vorher nicht. Deswegen vielleicht ist auch der Tenorfagott schon möglich. Schon möglich, man kann auch denken auf ganz praktische Gründe. Vielleicht leichter zu kaufen, leichter zu pflegen, leichter beim Marschieren. Ja, diese Militärmusik sollte viel beim Marschieren, ist weniger schwer, wer weiß. Auch vielleicht, das ist nur ein Gedanke, habe ich so laut gedacht. Und was ist mit Volksmusik? Weil ich habe oft gesehen, von Erfahrung von dieser Harmonie, solche ungewöhnliche Instrumente wurden in der Tanzmusik, Volksmusik verwendet. Und dann natürlich ist es sehr schwer, eine zu finden, weil das ist nur fast mündliche Tradition. Aber wäre auch der Tenorfagott auch als Teil oder hat auch bei solcher Tanzmusik mitgewirkt. Das war der Fall beim Renaissance-Musik, ne, mit Lucian und so vorher. Wieso auch nicht in diesem 17., 18. Jahrhundert zum Beispiel. Jetzt, das war. Und jetzt über dieses Instrument in Wien, ne, diese Fagottino 169. Gibt ein bisschen Vorgeschichte. Das Instrument gehört die Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde. Das ist ein Privatarchiv und ist in der Sammlung alter Musikinstrumente Wien dann ausgestellt. Seit November ist der Saal zugesperrt, wegen Bau, Sanierung und so. In Klammer, Gott sei Dank, ich arbeite dort gelegentlich mit Kontakten, könnte durch die Baustelle und diese Fotos dann machen. Aber ich muss mich entschuldigen, die Fotos von Qualität ist so Privatfoto, ne? Von der Glas und so ist nicht. Und eigentlich, ich muss auch ehrlich sein, ich habe keine Genehmigung von der Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde bekommen. Ich habe gefragt. Und 3-mal nein. Das heißt, dieses Foto sind nur für meinen persönlichen Zweck. Ich war nur als Besucher dort, ja, und dieses Foto gemacht. Ja. Ich darf leider nicht publizieren oder veröffentlichen. Aber ich habe sicher gesehen, man findet dieses Buch von Eusebius Moniszewski, auch ein bekanntes Buch von 1912, und es gibt ein bisschen was, eine kurze Beschreibung über dieses Instrument, man kann das lesen, ne? Mensur 89 cm lang, Holzbohrung 1,52 cm, Messingbeschläge, 8 Grifflöcher, 9 Klappen. Das Instrument stammt aus Franz Wussinger aus Klagenfurt, wurde sogar datiert, mehr oder weniger. Instrumentenmacher ist unbekannt. Nein, Entschuldigung, das stimmt nicht, Entschuldigung. Und auch interessant hier ist Geschenk des Direktionsmitglieds Dr. E. Plutzer, 1898. Mein Kollege gefragt, kennt ihn? Wir kennen ihn nicht so. Und ich habe im Internet auch, man sollte, wer war das? Na, diese Plutzer, ehrlich habe ich nicht die Zeit bis jetzt noch genommen. Aber wenn man sich die Fotos jetzt ein bisschen ansieht, man kann auch schnell erkennen, dieses Instrument ist kein Sammlungsstück, er hat gespielt. Viel Kratzer, die Polster wurde sicher dann getauscht und so, ja. Wenn man sieht, ich habe ja für diese Klappen auch ein bisschen genauer die Fotos dann gemacht. Aber leider, das Instrument ist schwer beschädigt. Ja. Ist in diesem Zustand unspielbar, ohne feste Restaurierung und so. Vielleicht für Forschungszwecke, aber nicht mehr. Aber man kann trotzdem schon sagen, dieses Instrument hat sicherlich eine lange Geschichte dann hinter sich. Und wäre das auch gut, ein Forschungsprojekt zu versuchen, ein bisschen diese Geschichte nachzuvollziehen. Und damit bin ich fertig. Danke.
Vielen Dank, Herr Gasch. In der Wissenschaft ist ja auch ein Ergebnis, dass man nichts gefunden hat, ein gutes Ergebnis. Fragen, Kommentare?
Asking you, I can't remember a book of Bruno Brevan. I don't know if you know. He wrote a book about the music and French Revolution. Mm-hmm. In this text, he said about the music of the revolution made by the people, organized by musicians, became very important in the history of the music, and he played only bassoon and oboe. Mm-hmm. I was a student of Academy of Fine Arts. I asked him to me, how is it possible? People, generic people, for the revolution celebration, prepared by a musician and oboe and bassoon. Mm-hmm. Now I ask you if you know something about this period, because it was similar to an harmony. The harmony was organized was a soldier. In this case, for me, it's still a question.
Thank you. Yes and no. I have some information or element to respond your question. In this French Revolution, there is the beginning of the modern wind band or the wind orchestra. Yeah, but the function, in difference or comparison with harmonium, is very different. Harmonium music is accompanying the dinner, Tafelmusik, and the aristocratic things on events. In French, no more. In France, the band is accompanying patriotic ceremonies. And the creation of the first, the Garde Nationale, Garde Impériale, the first one is to teach musicians, young musicians or musicians to play wind instruments, bassoon, flutes, clarinet. It's very interesting thing. Before the official foundation of the conservatory, 2 years before 1793, there are 11 classes of clarinet of this conservatory. 11. Yeah. And the first element. And we need not for opera, we need musicians for outside these concerts, events outside, to play a good music, not just bad music or from quality. And other sides, Pierre Constant saying in his book, The Christian of the Creation of the Conservatory in France, for example, We have the monopoly of German musicians in France, clarinet and horn. It's very interesting. That was our topic or paper of me about the influence of German musicians, German, Böhmen, or Moravian musicians, but all these are German musicians in France. For example, the flutist, I don't have his name now, other one was German musicians, but now the bassoon Gebauer, I think so, is the French, really French musicians. So, but just band with oboe and just band of bassoon, I don't know really, but I think it's true. It's not true. I think it's more Alsace formation. Just it's with clarinet, but clarinet is a melodic or become to the melodic part of the orchestra with oboe and flute, of course, and all other one. It's more in comparison. Is more in the Turkish music. More this instrumentation. We make a comparison between France, Paris, and Austria or Germany. Welcome.
Other questions, andere Fragen? Donna.
Thank you very much for this important information. I'm a champion of harmony music very much, and I'm a bit surprised in the early music movement how little research and how little performance is taking place. And that's a big concern for me. Do you see a future to
Yes, I see a big future.
With education and also for performance possibilities, because I have a feeling it's completely been pushed aside.
Yes, of sure. I hope so. I can so not say I hope so. We are here, for example, my colleagues Klaus Hupmann are in this institute try now with historical instrument to record music, to not just to record, to research, and then to research to record or concert or CDs or something else. And I have the connection, this network between, for example, in England, there are some harmony music, of very beautiful music and records. Yes, there are a lot to do in this organology or repertoire or compositions or history or. And we try to sensibilize, for example, students and make this bachelor or this master on this, for example, but not just research. And I make this now. I am musician too, not just paper and not just book, but or a concert, for example. Yeah.
Danke, David. Ich möchte nur eine Sache noch ein bisschen klarstellen. Er hat es nicht, du bist darauf nicht so eingegangen, aber wir haben zweimal den Begriff Quadfagott gemerkt. Also bei Koch, der schreibt, dass die Harmoniemusik auch zusätzlich manches Mal ein Quadfagott gehabt hat. Und hier haben wir bei der Trostpartite auch Fagott Quarto. In diesem Fall da ist es natürlich ein Hochquadfagott, aber bei Koch meint natürlich das Tiefquadfagott. Das deutsche Kontrafagott in der Harmoniemusik, das wir vor allem an 3 Orten eigentlich ständig gehabt haben, nämlich in Hessen-Darmstadt bei Sartorius, der oft dieses Tiefquadfagott verwendet hat, und in Rudolstadt in der Harmoniemusik, da gibt es auch einen AMZ-Bericht von 1814, glaube ich, wenn ich das jetzt richtig im Kopf habe. Und dann im Repertoire des Arztes, glaube ich, war er, oder Handelsmann Exner in Zittau. Also ihr werdet wahrscheinlich das alle kennen, die Harmoniemusik-Spezialisten. Das sind diese Partiten, die dem Josef Haydn zugeschrieben werden, wo eine davon Serpent Fagotto Quarto hat. Das ist das tiefe Quadfagott. Also das ist praktisch das deutsche
Kontrafagott im Unterschied zum Wiener Kontrafagott.
Ja, gut, danke, dass du sagst, das stimmt, da habe ich nicht gesagt. Na, diese Quadfagottik ist nicht zu verwechseln, das ist klar. Nochmal, wie gesagt, man braucht ein Bassinstrument und Quadfagott war eine gewisse Lösung, so dass ein bisschen dieses Bass ist.
Ich hätte eine Frage, die sich auch vielleicht ein bisschen an das Fagottino-Team richtet. In meiner Erinnerung, ganz weit hinten, es gibt dieses Pärchen von Scherer Fagottini in Zürich. Eines, also kein Pärchen, aber eines, und da fehlen Klappen. Die Klappen wurden nie, also die sind wie bei einem normalen Fagott angelegt, aber es wurde nie ausgeführt. Das heißt, der Hersteller hat diese Klappen nicht, die auf der Bassröhre, die Tiefen, nicht angefertigt, so als würde man sie nicht brauchen. Er hat ein Modell gehabt und hat das aus Kostengründen nicht fertig gemacht. Also ist meine Erinnerung, wir waren damals in Zürich, um die zu untersuchen. Und ich hatte mir damals gesagt, oh, das ist sicher ein Militärmusikinstrument, ohne dass ich jetzt sagen könnte, warum ich darauf kam.
Nein, das besser nicht.
There are two Fagotto d'amore from the in the Jura, which have no keys attached to the long joint.
All these
Yeah.
Lots of keys. No, it's in Zurich, in Bellerive, now it's in the Hochschule. It's from the Bellerive collection.
All we have seen is the share that we've copied, but that's complete. So I'm unaware of that.
Okay, perhaps my memory is okay.
Once again, what is your point of being connected to military music?
Yes, I wonder. In my memory, it's connected to military music, because perhaps if I reconstruct my naive thoughts about is perhaps okay. This is an instrument like the hautbois d'église from this Jura connection. It's not worth to invest a lot of work if you don't need the necessary keys. But you have a model and okay, you do it. But yeah. Okay, I have to check it again. Perhaps I have. Yeah. I have to look up my notes about. Sorry. Any other questions?
What is your perception after what I said about the use of fagottino in Italy specifically, and what is your perception of what you found out beyond the Alps? No, because perhaps, for example, Farbach, he was talking two different ways in Austria and in Italy. You know, we have found one instrument in the wind band, in the depot of the wind band of Schio for Kleinen. And this instrument has been there since ever, so it means they were using somehow these little instruments to support what? You know, because this is also the question, when I look to the repertoire, the Neapolitan repertoire, where the fagottino is used, for example, in Anfossi or in Cimarosa, Artemisia, Regina d'Egitto, which has this kind of exotic provenance, origins. When in the first choir, when they welcome the Artemisia, the fagottino is used, and apparently is openly used only there. And I've noticed now that when you clarify the ensemble setting of the harmony music, in that choir there is an ensemble setting which can be related to harmony music with bassoons, oboes, clarinets, flutes, and trombones, and horns, and trumpets. And surprisingly, the fagottino is used somehow as a bassetto of the cuivre, which I find it very interesting. And now, just putting the puzzle together with what you said, I would like to know what is your guess also. What was really happening?
I'm sorry, I don't have a perception. Honestly, I don't have an idea what happened in Italy.
Yeah, well,
that's not my point. I am in Germany, Austria. Of course, you know, North Italy is very different than South Italy. But North Italy is very connected with Austrian music and this Habsburg family and this one. I cannot say Milano or this state maybe, but they are all brother of the imperial family or something in this part. But I'm sorry, I don't know it in Italy. For me, it was very interesting, your paper. For example, I see the connection, but this player, this bassoon fagottino player, was at the same time military or was military player. And the connection, I play in military band, but maybe at the same time in the opera, but not a problem in this time. I was very good instrumentist for this reason. It's the same in French, yeah, we see in Paris, some instrument or some instrumentist from the military music.
Okay, if there's no other question for the moment, I would like to thank you again.
Thank you.
And I thank all speakers, of course, of the afternoon session, as well of you attending this. We have now a break until 7 o'clock. There will be the concert here at 7 o'clock. And tomorrow morning, we're starting here again at 9:30 sharp. Okay.